Have you ever imagined looking at someone seemingly innocent and realizing you're face to face with a serial killer? John Joubert was young, polite, and appeared to be an average guy, but behind that mask hid a twisted and deadly mind. In this video, you'll uncover the disturbing story of this teenage serial killer who terrorized the United States. I'll show you how he chose his victims, how he managed to deceive family, friends, and even the police for so long, and what ultimately led to his capture. Get ready, because the next few minutes will take you on a dark journey into the true face of evil. You won't believe what you're about to hear. It was a typical morning in Papillion, Nebraska. Children walked to school, neighbors exchanged greetings, and everything seemed like just another peaceful day in small-town America. But beneath that seemingly calm routine, something dark was about to surface. A 13-year-old boy had vanished without a trace. His name was Danny Joe Eberly. He was just a few steps from home, delivering newspapers on his usual route, when he disappeared, as if swallowed by the air. Danny's disappearance froze the town. Search teams spread across streets, alleys, parks, and wooded areas nearby. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no concrete clues. It was as if he had simply vanished. But what no one could imagine was that this was just the beginning of a much darker nightmare, and behind the disappearance was someone cold, calculated, and shockingly young. Days later, Danny's body was found in a remote field. The discovery was horrifying. He had been tied up, tortured, and murdered with chilling precision. The injuries suggested this wasn't an impulsive act, but a well-planned execution, done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The once tranquil town fell into fear and suspicion. Parents began escorting their kids to school. Doors were locked earlier. Terror had taken hold. Soon after, in a nearby city, another young boy went missing. The pattern repeated. The police, now on high alert, began to suspect they were dealing with an active serial killer targeting innocent young boys. But what baffled investigators the most was the profile of the killer. There were no suspicious sightings, no footprints, no fingerprints. It was like a ghost operating in the real world. And the most disturbing part, whoever was behind these crimes seemed to be just getting started. Before making headlines as one of the youngest and most disturbing killers in American history, John Joubert was just another boy among many others. Born on July 2nd, 1963, in Lawrence, Massachusetts, Joubert had a childhood marked by emotional instability, deep loneliness, and an almost complete lack of affection. His parents divorced when he was still young, and the split left deep emotional scars. Raised by his mother, a strict, controlling woman, Joubert was forbidden from contacting his father, a figure he secretly admired. This emotional rupture created a suffocating environment, one with no room for emotional expression, no space for dialogue or understanding. Instead, Joubert grew up in silence, trapped inside his own mind, a mind that would soon become a dark and dangerous place. Even as a child, he began to show violent fantasies. At first, nothing obvious or alarming, but inside, he was developing what would become an uncontrollable obsession, the desire to dominate, hurt, and kill. At just 13 years old, he stabbed another boy with a pencil. The victim survived, and the incident was dismissed as a typical schoolyard fight. No one suspected it would be the first step toward a horrifying path. During his teenage years, Joubert became increasingly withdrawn, caught between the bullying he endured at school and the fantasies of control and power he fed in secret. He spent hours reading about war, violence, and murder. When he wasn't buried in books, he wandered the streets, watching children, imagining what it would be like to attack them. His pleasure didn't come from violence alone, but from total control over the victim, physical and psychological domination. It was as if he sought, through crime, the power he never had in his own life. And yet, to the outside world, John seemed like just a quiet, introverted young man. Maybe a bit strange, but never dangerous. He got good grades, participated in school activities, and even joined the Boy Scouts. That duality is what makes his case so terrifying. The ability to appear completely normal while planning unthinkable atrocities. Later, After joining the U.S. Air Force, Joubert was transferred to Nebraska. It was there, far from home, far from any control, that he finally unleashed his darkest impulses. And when he got the chance, he struck. The quiet, polite boy from Lawrence had vanished. In his place emerged the true face of evil. On September 18, 1983, the city of Bellevue, Nebraska, awoke to one of its darkest mornings. The disappearance of Danny Joe Eberly, a 13-year-old boy, would mark the beginning of a series of brutal crimes that would reveal to the world a cold and calculating killer, John Joubert. That morning, Danny had left home early to deliver newspapers in the neighborhood, just like he did every day. But this time, he didn't return. His bicycle was found lying on the ground, and newspapers were scattered across the sidewalk. No witnesses, no sounds, no cries for help. It was as if the boy had been swallowed by the shadows. 3 days later, Danny's body was discovered in a remote field on the outskirts of the city. He had been tied up with cords cut with near-surgical precision and bore multiple stab wounds. The injuries showed clear signs of torture. It was evident whoever committed this crime wasn't just killing. They were savoring the victim's suffering. The modus operandi left investigators stunned. The bindings were unusual, made from a specific type of military cord. The placement of the body, the choice of location, the lack of physical evidence. It all pointed to an experienced killer, someone who planned every detail in advance. But no one, absolutely no one, suspected the perpetrator could be a young airman stationed at a nearby base. Just over 2 months later, on January 2nd, 1984, Christopher Walden, 12 years old, vanished on his way to school. Witnesses reported seeing a car pull up beside him. Christopher seemed hesitant, but eventually got in. 48 hours later, his body was found in a wooded area, also showing signs of torture, strangulation, and stab wounds to the torso. The brutality was even worse than before. The killer was becoming bolder and more vicious. Panic spread. Schools increased security. Parents forbade their children from walking anywhere alone. The once peaceful town now lived under the terror of an invisible predator, a killer who hunted children in broad daylight and vanished without a trace. Authorities now understood they were dealing with a pattern, a serial killer, but without solid evidence, they were in the dark. It wasn't until Joubert made a mistake that the investigation finally gained traction. In Portland, Maine, where Joubert had lived before moving to Nebraska, a third case came to light. Richard Stetson, an 11-year-old boy, had been found murdered with the exact same characteristics as the other victims. Police realized the crimes were connected by one very specific detail: the type of cord used, a technical rope issued for military use. And this wasn't just any rope, it was distributed only on certain Air Force bases. That clue was essential. Using this information, investigators began combing through records from the Air Force Base in Nebraska. That's when the name John Joubert surfaced. He fit the profile perfectly. Young, intelligent, with access to the materials used in the crimes, and a past marked by violent, disturbing behavior. When Joubert was brought in for questioning, he remained calm. But once confronted with the rope evidence and a witness sketch that matched his description, he crumbled. He confessed to the murders in detail, revealing a level of coldness that chilled even the most experienced officers. He explained how he stalked his victims, how he planned the attacks, how he felt pleasure at every stage of the execution. It was as if he were telling the story of a movie, but this horror was real. With 2 brutal murders in Nebraska and a similar case reported in Maine, authorities began piecing together the puzzle of a serial killer who operated with intelligence, cold precision, and military-level planning. But one detail caught the investigators' attention, a clue that would change the course of the entire investigation: the rope used in the crimes. It wasn't just any rope. It was a specific, highly durable type of technical cord used in the military. After forensic analysis, experts concluded that this kind of rope was only available within certain units of the United States Air Force. It was an unusual detail, but also a valuable lead. For the first time, the police had something concrete. The killer might be inside the military system itself. With this in hand, civilian investigators teamed up with military officials and began filtering through personnel records at Offutt Air Force Base, located near the crime scenes. The focus was clear: identify individuals with access to that rope who also displayed any unusual behavior. The search was meticulous. Hundreds of names, reports, schedules, and profiles were analyzed. And among them, one name stood out: John Joubert. Joubert drew attention not only because of his access to the material, but also due to internal reports of strange behavior, social isolation, lack of empathy, moments of quiet aggression, and an unusual emotional detachment. He was the type of soldier who followed orders but never connected with anyone. When police approached him, Joubert didn't seem surprised. He remained calm, answered questions politely, and even appeared cooperative. But everything changed when the agents presented a visual clue: a composite sketch made from a witness who saw Christopher Walden getting into a car. The sketch was strikingly similar to Joubert. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Confronted with this, he hesitated. The agents noticed a shift. His eyes froze, his breathing changed. It was as if, internally, the killer was beginning to emerge. And then came the break. In a confession that lasted hours, John Joubert began to describe what he had done with no remorse, no hesitation. He detailed how he approached his victims, how he prepared days in advance, how he used a rope to restrain them, and the pleasure he felt in hearing their screams. He confessed to the murders of Danny Joe Eberly and Christopher Walden in Nebraska, and also admitted to killing Richard Stetson in Maine. But the most disturbing part was the coldness in his voice. To Joubert, it all made sense. He claimed he felt driven to kill, as if it were a psychological need. The pain of his victims, he said, triggered a kind of euphoria, a rush of power and control that made him feel alive. It was a confession, but it sounded more like a clinical report, as if he were describing a routine task. The police then began investigating whether there were other unknown victims. Based on the confession details, they mapped his movements, reopened cold cases, and cross-referenced data with other states. Joubert's pattern was clear, but his ability to vanish after the crimes made it difficult to confirm a higher number of victims. Still, there was one undeniable truth. Had he not been caught, he would have killed again. The hunt had ended, but the unease remained. How could someone so young, so seemingly ordinary, turn into a merciless predator? How had he fooled parents, teachers, superiors, even psychologists? And perhaps the most terrifying question of all, how many other Jouberts are out there right now, just waiting for the perfect moment to strike? When John Joubert was formally taken into custody, there was a heavy, silent tension in the air. It wasn't the typical moment of relief when police finally capture a brutal criminal. It was deeper, darker. Investigators knew they had the killer in their hands, but what they would find inside his mind was still a terrifying unknown. It felt like standing before a locked door, and whatever lay behind it might be far worse than the crimes themselves. As Joubert was brought into the interrogation room, he appeared far too calm. He sat upright, looked the agents in the eyes, and maintained composure at all times. There was no shaking in his voice, no sweat on his hands. It was as if he was comfortable there, as if, finally, he was exactly where he felt he belonged. For hours, investigators took turns trying to break him, but they didn't have to push very hard. Once they confronted him with the evidence, the sketch, the exclusive military rope, the timeline matching his movements, Joubert cracked. But no one was prepared for how he would break. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't panic. He spoke, clearly, in detail, as if recounting someone else's story. He confessed to the murders one by one, describing with chilling precision how he chose his victims, how he gained their trust, how he restrained them, and finally, how he killed them. He didn't just remember the details. He relived each scene with a disturbing sense of satisfaction. For the investigators, hearing those confessions was like stepping into the mind of a predator. Joubert showed no guilt, no excuses. Instead, he explained everything with an almost instructional tone, as if he were teaching a method. He said he felt these urges since childhood. His fantasies always involved pain and control. He admitted that killing brought him a sense of relief, satisfaction, and power. "It was like shutting off a pain I carried inside," he once said. But the most terrifying part? That pain would always return, and with it, the need to kill again. FBI agents, psychologists, and prosecutors took turns in follow-up interrogations. Joubert underwent intense psychiatric evaluations, and the reports confirmed it. He exhibited traits of antisocial personality disorder and extreme sexual sadism. And yet, despite his diagnosis, he was declared fully competent, fully aware of his actions and their consequences. In court, Joubert's presence stirred a mix of fascination and horror. The victims' families wept in silence. Journalists filled every seat. Joubert, however, remained emotionless. When called to testify, he once again spoke calmly. He reaffirmed his confessions and even showed a kind of pride in being studied as a rare case. In one moment of pure coldness, he declared that he felt more important being treated like a puzzle to be solved. He was sentenced to death in Nebraska and also received a life sentence in Maine, where the death penalty was not applied. He spent over a decade on death row before being executed by electrocution in 1996. In his final minutes, he refused to say a word. He left the world the same way he had lived, in silence, in control, and without remorse. But the case of John Joubert didn't end with his death. On the contrary, it became a subject of study in universities, criminology courses, documentaries, and books. His mind, full of dark voids, continues to raise difficult questions. How could someone so young and seemingly ordinary hide such monstrosity? And worse still, how many others may be among us right now, hiding an abyss behind an innocent face? What turns an apparently ordinary boy into a merciless killer? That was the question that echoed among psychologists, criminologists, and behavioral experts after the arrest and confession of John Joubert. Behind his youthful face and calm expression hid a fractured mind, clouded by fantasies of domination, pain, and death. But how was this monster shaped? Was he born this way, or created by his circumstances? From an early age, Joubert showed signs that, at the time, were ignored. He was a lonely child, socially withdrawn, emotionally disconnected. His first violent impulses appeared before adolescence. Small acts of cruelty to animals, desires to harm classmates, pleasure in provoking fear. But these signs were lost in the midst of a troubled home life, with little affection, an extremely strict mother, and the absence of a father figure. Instead of guidance, Joubert grew up in an environment of emotional isolation and silent repression. Psychiatric evaluations conducted after his arrest revealed a deeply disturbing profile. Joubert was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and sexual sadism disorder, a dangerous combination. He showed total disregard for social norms, lacked empathy, and had a near-ritualistic need to inflict physical and psychological pain. More than killing, he wanted control, to break his victims, dominate them completely, watch life slip away while he held absolute power. During interrogations, Joubert revealed that his violent fantasies began around the age of 6. He described imagining children being beaten, tied up, silenced. Over time, these mental images evolved into full torture and murder scenarios. At age 13, he stabbed a classmate with a pencil. Later, he tried to strangle another boy with a rope, not out of anger, but impulse. He described these acts as needs. It was like being thirsty or hungry. I needed to do it to feel normal. That, the way he naturally spoke about violence, fascinated the specialists. He showed no signs of delusion, heard no voices, and didn't exhibit psychosis. Quite the opposite. His mind was logical, articulate, strategic. He meticulously planned his attacks, from selecting the victim to choosing the location and disposing of the body. He was a chilling fusion of cold rationality and a burning desire for destruction. One of the most striking insights came from a forensic psychiatrist who evaluated him for weeks. According to him, Joubert wasn't insane, he was sadistic. His pleasure was directly tied to the suffering of others. The pain of his victims was the fuel for his arousal. not just sexual, but emotional. For a brief moment, he felt whole, complete, as if his identity only made sense in the presence of chaos. These revelations sparked fierce debate in the scientific community. Is it possible to predict this kind of behavior? Can we detect a future killer before he acts? Some experts say yes, if early warning signs are taken seriously. Extreme isolation, enjoyment of harming living beings, lack of guilt, and fascination with violence. Others argue that not every person with these traits becomes a criminal, that the formula for a monster includes both nature and nurture. In Joubert's case, it's clear that his environment lit the fuse, but perhaps the fire was already burning inside him. The lack of affection, his mother's suffocating control, his father's abandonment, the bullying he endured, all of it created the perfect soil for his fantasies to grow. And with no intervention, no empathy, no limits, he grew up believing he could do whatever he wanted. And he did. Even after his arrest, experts continued to study him. Interviews, psychological tests, reports, all were used to try to understand his profile. But in the end, they all reached the same unsettling conclusion. John Joubert knew exactly what he was doing. And he did it because he wanted to, with pleasure, with control, with calm. The mind of a monster, in his case, wasn't chaotic. It was clear, calculated, and profoundly dangerous. Decades have passed since John Joubert was executed. His crimes were judged, he paid with his life, and justice, at least on paper, was served. And yet his name still echoes through criminology lectures, classrooms, documentaries, and now, in this video. Why we still talk about John Joubert? What keeps drawing us back to this dark story? The answer might seem simple: curiosity. Humans are naturally drawn to what breaks the norm, what represents a hidden threat, what defies the basic rules of coexistence. But in Joubert's case, it goes deeper. He wasn't a monster with a grotesque face. He didn't live in the shadows. He didn't scream for help or display obvious signs of insanity. He was an ordinary young man, clean-cut, articulate, intelligent, and profoundly evil. That contradiction is what terrifies us the most. Joubert forces us to face an uncomfortable truth. Evil doesn't always come with a warning. It can stand beside us, smiling, helping, greeting, pretending to belong. And that's why his story remains relevant. It reminds us that danger doesn't always look dangerous. Sometimes it wears the mask of normalcy. We also keep talking about Joubert because his case exposes the failures of society, of families, of institutions. How many opportunities were missed to intervene? How many warning signs were ignored? How many professionals observed him without truly seeing him? The Joubert case is a wake-up call about the importance of mental health, of empathy, of vigilance, and, above all, of truly listening. How many young people right now are going through the same pain he did? How many will be supported? And how many will be overlooked? But beyond the fear and reflection, there's also a deeper reason to remember: the memory of the victims. Talking about Joubert is not glorifying him. It's remembering Danny Joe Eberly, Christopher Walden, and Richard Stetson. Innocent boys, ripped from the world in brutal ways, who can no longer tell their stories. By revisiting this case, we give voice to the pain they couldn't express, and we reaffirm a commitment to truth, to justice, and to the duty to never let history repeat itself. Throughout this video, you've taken a journey through a disturbing story. You've seen the details, the victims, the investigation, the killer's mind, and the aftermath. But now, the question is yours. What did this case awaken in you? Fear? Sadness? Outrage? Or a clearer awareness that when evil is ignored, it doesn't disappear, it grows? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share your perspective. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told with depth, respect, and truth, consider subscribing to the channel. Because while evil hides in the shadows, we will keep shining a light. If you've made it this far, it means you truly dove deep into this story. Not just to understand the case of John Joubert, but to reflect on what can hide behind seemingly innocent faces. It means that you, like me, believe that knowing the past, no matter how dark, is a way to protect the future. This channel exists for that very reason, to give voice to the victims, expose hard truths, and shine a light on the darkest corners of human nature. Every video here is made with research, respect, and a real commitment to depth, because stories like this shouldn't be told superficially. They deserve to be felt, understood, and discussed. So, if this story stirred something in you, fear, empathy, anger, or awareness, consider subscribing. Here, you'll find true stories, impactful cases, and analysis that goes beyond the surface. And don't forget to like this video, because it helps spread this message to more people who need to hear it. Leave a comment below. What part of this story impacted you the most? What other case would you like to see told with this same intensity? Your voice could inspire the next episode. And remember, while evil hides in the shadows, we will keep uncovering the truth.